Most of the country supports abortion and believes that information about whether someone has had an abortion should be between that person, their doctor, and whoever else they choose to share that information with. But in what feels like a horrifying cross between George Orwell and a Margaret Atwood novel, just about anyone else can access that information too, thanks to the internet. And as a new Washington Post piece points out, Google searches for abortion clinics, phone location information, and even data from period tracking apps could be bought by police and private citizens alike and used to investigate suspected illegal abortions. Of course, this breach of privacy is nothing new. Joining me to discuss are two reporters, the ones behind that Washington Post piece, Geoffrey Fowler and Tatum Hunter. So this is really a dystopia that no one should be surprised by. Geoffrey, can you start by describing what you found?
Yeah, I think it's a reminder that the link between our civil rights and our digital rights is closer together than ever. What we found talking to privacy advocates and also people who work with women seeking abortions is that the phone is a repository of all kinds of information that could be used as evidence against a woman trying to seek an abortion in private if she lives in a state where that's against the law. There are so many things that a phone knows about you. It knows your Google searches. It knows your location. It might have an app that's collecting and storing data about your body. And all of that information, once it's taken up by a corporation, is available to the police because companies can get court orders to hand over information.
So Tatum, did you actually find examples of how this is working? I mean, Arizona, Mississippi, Texas, it would seem already like this kind of information could be misused. Did you find any examples?
So there's two big things to note here. One is the broader context of police making increasing use of mobile device forensic tools in their own investigations. One 2020 report found that they use it to investigate everything from marijuana possession to graffiti. The second thing is, when you drill down a little bit, there's precedent, even here in the US, of women's text messages about abortion and their internet search history about abortion being used as evidence against them when they're accused of a crime.
So have we seen any examples where in the case of abortion, if I, for example, I go to a Planned Parenthood, which, by the way, people should be aware, many people go there simply for regular health checkups. If one were to go to a Planned Parenthood, discuss abortion possibly, what would happen right now?
Well, two examples that might help. Earlier in the week, after the Roe versus Wade draft decision got leaked, some journalists went to a company called SafeGraph, which collects location data from people's cell phones, from apps that they might use, and was able to buy for about $160 information about all the people who had gone to these clinics, Planned Parenthood clinics, over the last week, where they were before they went to the clinic, where they went to the clinic, and then also afterwards. Now, it wasn't linked to their individual names, but that data was out there available for sale. So that kind of thing is already possible right now. Has it been used in these states that are making new laws to try to ban abortion? Not that we're aware of so far, but as Tatum said, there is plenty of precedent for this. The other example that might hit home in Massachusetts is, you may recall, a couple of years ago, some advocates against abortion used this same technology to place ads that would target people who were inside Planned Parenthood clinics with messages about not seeking an abortion. That's called geofencing, and Massachusetts then made that practice illegal.
Yeah, so Maura Healey did go after that particular ad agency, but apparently some of that data was still able to be used. Tatum, the laws in this country would seem to be very lax about this sort of thing. How do you have a sense of how good this country is at going after those kinds of data breaches? Is there any sense that there's really any kind of effect or impact when, in the example we just gave, it was not particularly effective? So what is it that can be done about data breaches at this point?
So when we talk to digital privacy advocates, a lot of them call for comprehensive privacy legislation at the federal level, which would crack down on companies' ability to collect data about us and share it with third parties. It's also important to look at our standing federal privacy legislation around our health. Right now, that's HIPAA, and that doesn't apply to a lot of these digital sources. So right now, the burden falls entirely on the individual to decide what they're comfortable sharing with companies. And unfortunately, most of us don't have the time to do this research and figure out all of the breadcrumbs we leave as we move through our lives. One thing that advocates did tell us is that people can always opt to not share their personal devices with police. They can opt for privacy browsers that obscure their search history, or even a virtual private network that obscures your identity when you browse the web. And then last, opting for encrypted messengers that don't store your data in plain text where law enforcement could end up getting their hands on it.
But Tatum, you mentioned digital breadcrumbs. Some of these seem pretty darn obvious. People are using menstrual tracking apps, one called Flow, for example. You know, you might say people should just write this sort of thing down. Doesn't that seem like a pretty obvious area where your privacy could be swept into this abortion issue? Why do people continue in the glaring light of this sort of example? Why would they continue to use this sort of thing?
Yeah, I think the question for me is less why do people continue to use it, and more why do companies continue to have confusing to parse data practices. I think that I would love to live in a place where I can use a map to track, or use an app to track my ovulation and have it be presented really clearly to me at the forefront where that data can head. I think that, you know, advocates for women's privacy when they choose to receive abortions would say that, you know, it's a lot for women to keep in mind. But of course, those menstrual apps are a real one-to-one connection. If I handed one of those tracking apps even to the person sitting next to me, it wouldn't take, you know, Sherlock Holmes to figure out if I had been pregnant in the last year.
So, Geoffrey, do you have any sense of whether apps like that and many others that track personal information, that they would be swept into HIPAA protection? It just seems that that is so unlikely in this environment, which is why the burden may actually fall on the consumer.
The burden does fall on consumers, and this is a big problem in the United States. In fact, Europe, which has stronger privacy laws, some companies in Europe no longer want to do business in the US because we can't comply with their laws to protect consumer privacy. As with regards to HIPAA, unfortunately, HIPAA only applies basically in cases where you are talking directly with your healthcare provider. That means any apps that collect data about you that isn't your healthcare provider are not covered.
So, Tatum, do you have any sense, you know, we want our data for free, and that's one of the reasons we've ended up in this situation, is the monetizing of our data. Do you have a sense of what we have to give up to get back some of our privacy?
I think that I would continue to shift the conversation back to companies because they're really in the position of power here. I think companies would have to give up the right to have our business without clearly disclosing at the beginning of that business relationship how they treat our data, what third parties they send it to, and what use those third parties make of it. I think that if there was a shift in the way that companies had to treat our health data, consumers' lives may go along, very similarly than they do now. But companies would have to kind of rethink how those ad-supported models look. They wouldn't have to go away entirely.
Well, looks like it will take a lot of pressure on those companies, or pressure on the lawmakers who have basically been waffling on this issue for quite a long time. Geoffrey, Fowler, Tatum, Hunter, thank you very much.
You bet.